I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I believe this is episode 140. We are getting up there in years, and at some point, Heavy Hands will become too geriatric to go on. But for now, we're still kicking, still feeling young. And we've got an event that really enlivened both of us to talk about, although I will say it was really only the last three fights at this event. Did you have a pretty tedious experience watching UFC 207 up until the last three fights, Pat?
Yeah, I did not find it particularly enjoyable. I liked Borg Smolka quite a bit.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that fight, but that was not one that really got the blood pumping super fast.
It slowly heated up a bit during the main card, but the last three are really the ones we want to discuss. By the way, I'm Connor Ruebusch. That's Patrick Wyman, the other voice you hear. We're the hosts of Heavy Hands. And today we're going to be talking about UFC 207. She's back, the return of Ronda Rousey, and she's gone. She lost in 44 seconds or something like that to Amanda Nunes. The other two fights, of course, Dominick Cruz's failed bantamweight title defense. We are looking forward to eating some delicious crow on that one and talking about how Cody Garbrandt beat Dominick Cruz. And then finally, we're going to discuss TJ Dillashaw versus John Lineker, masterclass from Dillashaw, and we will probably also talk a bit about the potential of Dillashaw versus Garbrandt for the bantamweight strap. So we'll get to those later. Let's start off with the one that everyone cared about. Probably big pay-per-view numbers. Huge cheer when Ronda Rousey arrived, when she showed up. People still care, and they probably will have a hard time caring as much anymore because Ronda Rousey got flattened by Amanda Nunes. Really, really flattened.
Got absolutely shit kicked.
Yeah.
Crushed, brutalized, viciously beaten down into a bloody pulp.
It looked like two different generations of fighters fighting each other.
Yeah, it reminded me, I honestly could not think of a good analog for a beating that comprehensive and that fast in MMA at that level, like in a championship fight, you know? Where a former champion got shit kicked so badly.
Yeah, maybe like the end of Liddell Ortiz, maybe. But even that was more competitive. I don't know. It was very, very one-sided. And it really looked like Nunes. It looked like a modern fighter. It looked like it would be if, I don't know, Luke Rockhold fought Hoist Gracie. Like, it was a different level of competition for Ronda Rousey, which is a shame. I was really hoping for good things, and I think Rousey obviously still has some athletic potential, still has a great skill set that just needs expanding. And I imagine we'll spend a good bit of today talking a little bit about Edmond Tarverdyan and how maybe along with him, she's kind of, you could say, squandered her potential as a top athlete in mixed martial arts. Because a lot of people were making fun of Pat Tarverdyan's corner advice, and it certainly wasn't the worst thing he's ever said in the corner. But I think the big thing is that a fight can and should never be made with corner advice. You know what I mean? That should not be where your game plan is decided. You should already have an idea of what you're going to do, or at least even if it's as simple as pressure them or stop them from getting the clinch or whatever. Even if it's really, really broad tactically, you should have some vague strategy going into the fight. And I can tell, it looked like Ronda's strategy was to kind of box with Amanda Nunes for a little bit before doing anything else. And that was kind of confusing.
Yeah, so we really didn't have a lot to go with because the fight lasted 48 seconds, but it really seemed like their plan was to kind of try and drag this out and wear Nunes down, that they thought that she would gas, that they thought Ronda could kind of stick around long enough to make Nunes throw, gas herself out, throw too much. And I don't think that was necessarily the worst plan in the world, but
No, and it looked like they were prepared for it. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Ronda looking so physically fit, so lean and muscular. It was a really sharp contrast with how she looked in the home fight, and it gave me a moment of hope for her, thinking that maybe stamina was a big issue in the home fight, and if she was against somebody who would gas after beating her in the first round, she could come back, and maybe she's not a fighter as limited as Nunes is with stamina, but it ended up not making any difference.
yeah, absolutely zero difference. Because if that was the plan, I don't think that Rousey had the tools to execute that. You know, like that's kind of the basic issue. If your plan is to play keep away from a long, rangy striker, how exactly were you going to tire her out? What exactly was your
Yeah.
plan there? You know?
Yeah, other than just survive, and that's obviously very difficult against Nunes, who is very likely the most dangerous now, especially with Ronda out, is probably the most dangerous first round fighter in the division. So it's we have a actually I kind of want to touch on this. We had a question. I got a message actually on Reddit on r/MMA, which we get a lot of good responses from for the show and everything. I love being on that subreddit. But I got a message from a user. I won't name his name in case he doesn't want it named publicly. But he asked us why we seemed to think that we're smarter than coaches. I don't think we typically do that. At least I try not to. Though we do, there are some camps that we typically criticize. But there's probably no example better. We can also get back to this when we get to Garbrandt and Cruz, because we certainly felt like we understood Garbrandt and didn't. But there's nobody who I think gets a worse treatment from us as a coach than Edmond Tarverdian. And maybe we can get into why that is. Like, why specifically? Are we just jumping on a bandwagon because it's obviously very popular now to blame Tarverdian for everything that's gone wrong in Ronda's career, however fair that may be? Or what reasons are there to assume that Tarverdian is a big part of Ronda's sort of demise as an elite fighter?
So, first of all, as far as Tarverdian is concerned, I want to note that we are not like we are far from the only people who have some knowledge of this sport who think that he's a shitty coach. Everybody thinks that he's a shitty coach.
And I'm sure there are things that Tarverdian knows that we don't know. And I'm sure, I mean, he was actually a pretty good kickboxer in his time too. So he knows how to fight. But I think it is possible to sit outside not being the same kind of expert as somebody in their field and say as an outsider. I mean, nobody would say we think we're smarter than Christopher Nolan if we had a show where we picked apart Interstellar. It's not that we think we're smarter than these people necessarily. In fact, I always assume that trainers and experts in their fields, whatever that field may be, they know a lot of stuff that I can't possibly know. But that doesn't stop me as an analyst from seeing specific things and saying, why is this the way it is? Just looking at it critically. And sometimes it can be better to be an outside observer looking at those things rather than someone who is in the slog all the time.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, like, I've watched a lot of camps teach a lot of classes. I've seen a lot of pro training sessions. I've talked to a lot of coaches over the years, and I think that there is an inherent mistake in assuming that because somebody is a coach, they are absolutely 100% an expert in whatever specific thing it is that we're talking about. Like, I think that there are a lot of really smart coaches out there. There are a lot of people who do have a good idea of what they're doing, but it also tends to show in the results. And there's nothing wrong with, like, coaches make mistakes. You know, when you're talking about people who have a whole bunch of fighters under their roof, maybe not everybody gets exactly the same amount of attention. Maybe the coach has made an analytical error in assessing the opponent's game.
Maybe they don't. Sometimes coaches don't care as much as they should, and they don't have a passion for coaching. That happens in every line of work. People just don't care enough.
That kind of stuff happens. And so assuming that the coach automatically has the right idea going into a fight is a flawed assumption.
I think maybe your opinion's the best one, and here's perhaps the best way to say why it's okay for you to have a bit of a critical opinion of Tarverdian. You can't necessarily understand everything that Tarverdian thinks and so on and so forth, but you've seen a good bit of what Tarverdian does with Rousey and how he corners his fighters and everything. And you have also seen and interviewed and observed people like Greg Jackson and Rafael Cordero and Firas Zahabi in the gym. You have done that personally. And so I think or you've gone to Team Alpha Male and all kinds of places. So it's probably pretty easy for you in particular to see a contrast between what Taverdian is doing and what those obviously genius elite coaches are doing.
He is not those guys.
Right.
Like, I don't know how this could possibly be clearer. And if you ask those guys on or off the record what they think of him, their opinion is not high. Like what was shocking to me, I don't think this is exactly putting them on blast, so I'll just go ahead and say it. The contempt in which Greg Jackson and Mike Winkeljohn and Brandon Gibson hold Tarverdian is stunning, is absolutely stunning to behold. How little they think of him, how little they think of how he trains his fighters, how little they think of how he corners, how little they think of how he prepares his guys. And like, those guys aren't foolproof. They're not omniscient. Like, I was talking to Brandon. Brandon and I had coffee when I was in Albuquerque, and we were talking about the Dodson-Lineker fight, and Brandon said that he told Dodson to like turn around and point at the floor one time after Lineker missed, and that was when Lineker got really mad and turned up the pressure and got things going a little bit better. That was a mistake. Brandon probably should not have told John Dodson to do that. Like, these guys do not always come up with foolproof plans, but they do a lot more than they don't. You know what I mean?
There's critical thinking there too. Like, Greg Jackson's fellow cornerman made a mistake urging Cub Swanson to go crazy and finish Do Ha Choi, but Greg Jackson was also there saying, all right, we should stop this. He was there to check himself. And I don't know that Edmund Tarverdyan has any self-checks to do, because
those guys can all critically evaluate the work that they do and say, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. But there is a sound underlying process that is usually going to be the right approach. Right? Like, doesn't mean that it works 100% of the time. There are always going to be factors that you can't account for. There are always going to be variables that we're not aware of necessarily as people who are watching. They're going to make mistakes in evaluating things sometimes, but more often than not, that's going to be right. I don't think there's any underlying process to what Edmund Tarverdyan does.
I don't
think he has
probably
any capacity for self-reflection.
There's probably a process. I'm just not sure how connected it is to what works and what doesn't work. I think his
process is, I'm going to teach you to throw punches. I think he thinks that there's a right way and a wrong way to do some things. And I think that it's very heavily predicated on on what he thinks is manipulating the psychological state of his fighters.
Yeah. And there seems to be a lot of I mean, I don't know. One easy example you could point to, for example, is how does Edmund Tarverdyan go into a fight with expecting Ronda to make Amanda Nunes miss with head movement, when every time we've ever seen him working with Ronda on the pads, he has been deliberately allowing her to get away with not moving her head by swinging the mitt over her head or around it, and not making sure that she's moving her head far enough away from its starting position that she could actually evade a punch targeted for that position, because she couldn't. She tried to move her head with Nunes. She wasn't moving it enough. She didn't know what having head movement felt like, because it appears, just with some conjecture here, but it appears that she has basically been taught those skills on the pads, and it might make her look really good in a choreographed pad routine, but Ronda has never even looked has never looked in a fight the way she looks in those training videos with Tarverdyan. It never crosses over, because it has no bearing on what a real fight is like. And so that might, she might be able to pull it off against somebody who's not Amanda Nunes or who's not Holly Holm. But it's like, most times when somebody says a fighter has been exposed, I kind of shake my head. Like, I don't think, for example, Dominick Cruz has been exposed. I think he could beat Cody Garbrandt with an adjustment of strategy. I can see the possibility there. I didn't think Renan Barão was exposed by TJ Dillashaw, even though it was a bad loss and he went on a bit of a bad run afterwards. I think Ronda Rousey has been exposed in her losses. I think it's become very, very clear what you have to do to beat Ronda. And because she seems so psychologically tied to Tarverdyan, who seems to be the root of some of those, that like single-mindedness that makes her exposable, that means I don't think she'll ever get it back. She would have to change camps, I think. As an outside observer, maybe there's something I don't know, but I can't imagine what Ronda Rousey would do while staying with Tarverdyan that would help her come back and get back on track.
She needs a coach who's going to rewire her psychologically. Like, that's who's going to rewire some of her basic reactions. So we talked about this before the fight. And I got some pushback from this when I talked about it in a few articles that I wrote last week. But Ronda doesn't like getting hit.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you need to be a successful fighter, you have to relish the feeling of somebody popping your jaw. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are better and worse ways to react to somebody punching you in the face, which as a professional fighter is the thing that's going to happen to you. Like, you are going to get hit. There's no way around that. You can try and minimize that or you can accept that it's a thing that's going to happen. There are different ways to approach the fact of getting hit. There is no way to not get hit. So you need to have reactions drilled into you that make it so that getting hit does not seem like the worst possible thing that could happen. There are some fighters who shy away after they start getting hit. Brock Lesnar is one of those. But Rousey, I think, occupies kind of the other end of the spectrum in terms of what you do when you get hit.
Which I think is – oh, sorry.
Well, it kind of knocks any semblance of a plan out of her head.
Yeah, but I think that's maybe more of a trainable reaction, is that she kind of zeroes in and thinks she's got to get it back. And if you could drill Ronda the right way, you could probably turn that into like a Juan Manuel Marquez sort of response, where she gets a little more dangerous when she gets hit. She kind of focuses in and becomes her mindset becomes, it's time to fight, which is sometimes a good thing. If somebody gets hit, they wake up and they fight better.
It's Tomas Almeida needs to get hit a couple of times before
Pyle.
he really.
If Mike Pyle survives that, if Mike Pyle had survived Alex Garcia's right hand, he would have finished Alex Garcia in round 2. That's just how it is. Some people get woken up and get better after they get hit a few times.
Yeah, but that's what I was getting to, is that reaction to getting hit. Like, there is probably a deep-seated psychological basis to why Ronda reacts that way, but that is not a thing that has to be. It's a sign of really bad coaching that she has reacted this way in all of her fights. Like, this is, if you know what you're looking for, you can go back and see this reaction from her in the Miesha Tate fight, in the second Miesha Tate fight, the Sarah McMahon fight. You can see this reaction especially in the Betch Correia fight.
Yeah.
And then you see it fully blossom in the Holly Holm fight, and then in this last one.
The two most athletic and well-prepared people she's faced, it becomes very apparent how limited what she can actually do after she gets hit is. You know, if somebody else keeps their head and she doesn't, then it becomes very stark contrast.
Yeah, because if you go back and you rewatch the Holm fight, like rewatch the first couple of minutes of the Holm fight with fresh eyes, try to keep out of your mind what happened, what ended up happening in that fight. Her pressure was not bad. She was doing a fairly decent job of cutting Holm off with looping strikes as she tried to circle out. Her forward movement was pretty decent. Like, she was there and she was too hittable, but it didn't really fall apart until she ate a flush straight left, then a left elbow from Holm. Yeah. And after that, everything fell apart, because that was the first couple of times she had really gotten hit clean. Yeah. Like right in the face. Had to figure out how she was going to deal with it.
Had to blink her eyes clear, had her head snapped back, and it totally changed the way she approached the fight.
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't. But these are reactions that can be trained. These are responses that can be trained. Like, if she were to go to Rafael Cordero and say, "Look, I need you to fix this shit," I think he could probably find a way to do that.
We've brought it up so many times, but it would be so perfect, man. Rafael Cordero or the Diaz brothers, go work with them. They already like you, like, you're in. Just go work with somebody who knows how to be an aggressive, come forward fighter with some semblance of consistent success.
Yeah, I mean, there are options for her out there, but like, this is kind of the delicate balance you have to walk with Rousey, is like, she's not super stable, right? Like, I think at this point we're probably fairly safe in saying that. Like, there are some issues there that you're going to need to deal with, and part of the reason that she's stuck with Tarverdian so long is because I think he understands her mindset for better and for worse. Like, but if she goes to Rafael Cordero and she said and she throws a fit and runs out of the gym, he's going to say, "Fuck it, all right, bye-bye, we'll see ya."
Yep.
Or if she goes to so there's a friend of the show, a guy you may have seen him on Twitter. I won't necessarily use his name because I don't know if he wants this getting out there, but like, so he used to train at Dynamics when Ronda Rousey was starting there, right? So this would have been like 2011, 2012 when she was dating Henry Akins before she left full time to go work with Tarverdian. And she used to go to like kickboxing classes, and she would spar sometimes in those kickboxing classes. So one day Ronda's throwing hard shots, and he's kind of like, oh, okay, well, fuck it. So he pops her with a jab, right? Like pops her right in the nose. Rousey pulls her gloves off, starts crying, and runs out of the gym.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
That's not a good sign, right? But so, and I think that like if that's kind of your underlying psychological state, like you need to be willing to work with somebody who can help you change
you
that.
need somebody who can, but also you need somebody who is as dedicated to you as as you are to them, and that may be a problem. Like that opens a window for guys like Tarverdian who may have some skeevier motivations to kind of hold on to you as a trainer.
Yeah, exactly. But so we've talked a lot about Ronda Rousey. I think our conclusion is, yes, this is fixable, but it's going to require some changes that maybe she's not capable of making.
Yeah, and since we talked about Rousey, this is the thing. We just said this before the show. I said, I don't have that much to say about this fight. The thing with Rousey, as you pointed out, you always have more to say about her. But I do want to, that the event was she's back. That was the theme. Obviously, Amanda Nunes deserves some celebration, but we're running up on 20 minutes now. So why don't we take a break? And when we come back, we can talk a little bit about what Nunes did and what we might hope to see, if not expect to see from her going forward as a defending champion. So we will get to that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Hello, we are back with Heavy Hands. We're going to talk about Amanda Nunes. We now talked all the way through everything we have to say about Ronda Rousey. But you know what I think we should do, Pat? I just thought of this while during our break. People will tune into this episode because of Ronda Rousey. I know that. But you know what's even more popular than Ronda Rousey? 1,000 degree glowing knives. Have you seen this on YouTube?
Yes, I have seen this. Also, I prefer the superheated hydraulic press.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
But I'm down for 1,000 degree knives.
I think we should title the episode "Cutting Ronda Rousey with 1,000 degree knife." Cutting through Ronda Rousey, or cutting 1,000 degree knife with 1,000 degree knife. How about that?
Yeah, you're going into too many layers here.
That's
Connor.
The next level.
That's too much.
Marketing genius, Connor Ruebusch. Well, let's actually talk about somebody who the UFC decided was not marketable. In fact, I believe Dana White said, we didn't promote Amanda Nunes because nobody knows who she is. Which does seem a little strange, because that does feel like that's what the word promote.
All of the stupid shit he's said about promoting fights over the years, the stuff that makes you wonder whether he actually has any fucking idea how to promote a fight, that was one of the most bizarre. He said something like, we could have spent $100 million advertising this, and still nobody would know who Amanda Nunes is. Like, that's not how fucking advertising works, jerk off. Like, I mean, it's
obvious that Ronda Rousey's the more marketable fighter. That nobody's complaining about that. But Amanda Nunes, I mean...
Well, okay, so no, what he means by that isn't that Amanda Nunes it can't be marketed or can't be promoted. What he means is that it's so much easier to promote Ronda Rousey that why would they bother trying to promote Amanda Nunes? Like, if you a savvy marketer might look at Amanda Nunes and say, first openly gay UFC champion, an immigrant success story from a poor town in Brazil. Like, there's an aspirational narrative there. Like, there's a lot like. Among a large Brazilian population in South Florida that's very into the UFC. There's a lot that you could do with Amanda Nunes. Oh, it also turns out she's pretty self confident, and she can talk reasonably well when she gets a hold of a microphone. Like, there's a lot that you could do with Amanda Nunes if you were inclined to try. The problem with the UFC isn't that they don't know how to promote. It's that they prefer to promote a particular kind of person because it's way easier to do it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of an interesting type of fighter that the UFC doesn't know how to promote, I kind of want to frame this. I'll be doing a pretty in-depth article on this topic, and as usual, I'm just mining my own article ideas for our heavy hands discussions. But you know who Amanda Nunes reminds me of, and who I hope she might turn into a version of, is Jose Aldo. She kind of reminds me of Jose Aldo. Later on, obviously, than Aldo was when he got to the peak, and she's had a harder way up. But dynamic, powerful striker with solid jiu-jitsu game that she doesn't always need, and stamina issues. And she even has like a similar backstory coming from the favelas and kind of making it in the U.S. in mixed martial arts. My question then is, can Amanda Nunes fix or at least mitigate her stamina issues the way Jose Aldo kind of did his? Because Aldo was still kind of he was still struggling a bit to make the transition from dynamic quick finisher to decision master around the time of the Hominick fight. And it wasn't until about the first Frankie Edgar fight that we really, really saw cool, collected, beat you in every one of the 5 rounds with nothing but a jab Aldo. That's really like the latest version of Jose Aldo.
I don't know if Nunes will ever turn into that, simply because I think the killer instinct is rooted so much more deeply in her personality and her game than Aldo's.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we'll ever see that. I think we can see, but I think given the kind of competition that she'll face at women's bantamweight, that will be less important for her than it was for Aldo.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think that there's less depth to this division. She's not going to face as many or as varied challenges as Aldo will. So I don't think she's going to need to transform herself quite to the extent that he did. It's funny that you mentioned Aldo, because Aldo was actually going to be the comparison that I used for Garbrandt.
Really?
So yeah. So we'll get to that in a minute.
I never complain at a chance to bring up Jose Aldo's name. You know that.
Yes.
So
yeah. Seriously.
We can do it again later. That's fine with me.
But so where I see that comparison being an Aldo comparison making sense here, and where I was also going to use it for Garbrandt, so is the footwork. Like, that what stood out to me about this fight was Amanda Nunes' footwork. Like, so Rousey, I don't think this has been fully appreciated, but when Nunes hit her, Rousey tried to respond in a pretty logical sense. She tried to get inside Nunes' punches, to step in, grab a hold of her, and clinch, right? Like, she was trying to move her head, slip past Nunes' long reach. Nunes is somebody who knows how to use her reach too. Get in there, grab a hold, and work the clinch. That didn't work. Because Nunes did a really good job of establishing a long range to start with, but also because Nunes moved her feet after every shot, after every combination she threw.
She kind of reminds me of her teammate. She reminds me of a super-powered version of her teammate Rashid Magomedov, with a lot of her straight punching, lateral movement, long kicks after punches, that kind of thing. She's turned into a really good but also very dangerous long-distance fighter.
Yeah, exactly. So that was something that Miesha Tate said, I think, on the pre-fight show. Thanks to a friend of the show, David Bixenspan, for pointing this out to me. When Tate was talking about fighting Nunes, she said the biggest thing that surprised her was how far away Nunes seemed when she hit her. That Tate didn't think that Nunes was in range when she landed those shots.
Yeah.
She thought that she was still a little bit too far outside, and so partially that's Nunes's long reach. She's got a big frame, long arms. Partially that's her explosiveness. She can cover distance very quickly, but it's also her footwork. Like, that's the thing that really, really stood out to me about that Nunes fight about that Tate fight when I was rewatching it over and over again, was every single time she threw, she was cutting angles. She was always cutting these tight, sharp angles after every shot she threw. So when Rousey tried to get inside, when Rousey tried to get a hold of her, Nunes wasn't there. That's why Rousey couldn't get a grip on her. Even somebody as strong and as physical as Rousey. It wasn't just Nunes' physicality. It's that Nunes was never right in front of her, giving her her hips. She was always a little bit too far back, a little bit too far off to the side, not giving her the angle that would allow Rousey to pull her into a clinch.
Yeah, and you often you often get that with fighters who are kind of bouncy too. Fighters who stay up on their toes. Sometimes it's a problem when somebody bounces a lot with their footwork because their opponents can time them coming in. They can tell when they're about to throw because they set their feet. They have to stop bouncing before they attack. But you can also play with that, and I think Nunes does it pretty well, where you give the opponent a few stops and starts, so they think they know. That you basically disrupt their ability to tell when you're setting your feet and when you're not. And then the bounces give you a kind of rhythm where you can sneak your feet in unbeknownst to the person. They know your feet are coming down, but they don't realize you've moved your left foot up 6 inches closer than it was before, or that you've moved slightly to the side at an angle where they can't block the punch with their left arm, and so on and so forth. Nunes does that really well. She's turned into a remarkably crafty range striker.
Especially when you're facing somebody like Rousey, who is still a pretty inexperienced striker and definitely a poorly trained one.
Yeah.
That, like, I doubt Edmond Tarverdyan has ever sat Ronda Rousey down and had a conversation with her about gauging rhythm.
Right.
Gauging her opponent's rhythm.
I doubt Ronda Rousey's ever done anything regarding rhythm specifically. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I do doubt it. And Nunes. That's why I ask about the Aldo thing too, because Nunes, we wondered if like having better conditioning would be the thing that changed when she became a full-time fighter, which still didn't happen that long ago. I think it was her at basically the start of her current winning streak after the Zingano fight is when she became a full-time ATT fighter. So only in 2015. But what it seems like is happening is maybe not the stamina issues are being solved right off the bat, but technique is improving pretty rapidly.
Yeah, very, very much so. I think for the first time because she's got a full team around her.
Yeah.
Like she was at MMA Masters before that, which isn't a bad camp. And they do some interesting things that at some point, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about in terms of the way they emphasize timing and athleticism and power and speed. Like there is an underlying plan to what they do there, even if it's not necessarily one that always wins them fights. And Nunes could do some good things with that style. Like that was effective for her for a little while. But at ATT, everything is much more. It's much more fundamentally sound, I think. Yeah. And so I was talking to Jason High about this, and I've interviewed a bunch of ATT fighters over the years. But like things like rhythm, things like footwork, angles, those are topics of conversation in the gym. That is part of the culture. And kind of the norms around talking about fighting at ATT. When you have people like Robbie Lawler who have been in the game forever, who are willing to give of themselves to younger fighters, they have a whole women's team. They have a whole staff of coaches there. Yep. Like ATT is a really, really, really good camp.
ATT might be at this point the best women's MMA gym in the world. Because they've got Amanda Nunes, they've got Ioane and Jacek. Do they have Tisha Torres as well?
Yeah, Tisha Torres is there. Nina Ansaroff.
They've got quite a good women's team.
Yeah, they have a full women's team. They're one of the few camps that has a full women's team. Yeah. Like you go to even if you go to Jackson's, like Holly Holm is still going to be sparring with dudes. Like Jody Esquivel was sparring with Ray Borg prior to his fight. Not like going really hard, but they were working on like movement stuff.
Yeah.
Like ATT is maybe the only camp that has a full women's team that does their own practices and all that. So, but at any rate, like I think we have to appreciate how good Nunes has gotten. Like I think if she fights somebody like Juliana Pena, she's going to beat the crap out of Pena.
Yeah, basically, if you're anybody who is used to being able to run into punches, and who kind of gets by on being fairly tough and having a fast pace. Nunes can match your pace. The punches you're going to be running into are going to be worse. I mean, basically, I think the truest thing that either of us said before the fight is when you said that if you get hurt running into Holly Holm's punches, then Amanda Nunes will make you find religion, is basically what you said. I think that's the truest thing we said, is that basically Nunes is, like Rousey was before her, is the kind of fighter that you just can't get away with the other stuff you can get away with in this division when you fight her.
Yep.
She's the one who has the consequences to your actions that other people cannot give you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we already saw this fight, but I think the worst matchup in the division for her is Valentina Shevchenko, because Shevchenko is so good at those striking fundamentals that she's not going to give Nunes many opportunities. Yeah. I think that fight would have gone a little differently if Nunes hadn't sold out trying to finish her in the second.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that were she not now tied up with a meaningless 145-pound title, it would be interesting to see Holly Holm fight Amanda Nunes for a 5-rounder as well. Both of those, her and Shevchenko both have some similar things they could offer Nunes to test her stamina and her striking composure down the stretch. But
I would definitely pick Nunes over Holm, and I would still pick her over de Randamie simply because de Randamie's ground game I don't think is on.
Yeah.
I think the second that fight goes to the ground, it looks a lot like their first fight did. Mm-hmm. But Holm would be interesting. I would still pick Nunes, but Holm can test Nunes in ways that I don't think anybody else in the division can.
It's fun to have Nunes. It makes the division really interesting to have somebody like Nunes at the top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. She's young still. She's only 28.
28, yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah, like I said, she's not as young as Aldo was when he won the WEC belt, but she's pretty young. And I have this kind of feeling that maybe women reach their primes a little later than men. I've been wondering if that might be true for a while, and or if it is just a factor of the women's talent pool being smaller, so there's more old people. Time will tell. But
yeah, okay, so let's move on to Cruz Garbrandt. What did you think here, Connor?
Well, let me tell you, Pat, I got a big plate here. I got a crow on it, and it's looking good. I roasted this bad boy, 425, hour and a half, honey glaze, dill, lemon. I'm excited to eat this crow, and I don't think I've ever been more excited to eat some crow, because I 100% did not think that Cody Garbrandt would convincingly win a decision over Dominick Cruz, and I could not have been more excited as I witnessed that upset playing out. I've never been more shocked. And let me tell you the main reason, this is all I could come up with for why it was such a surprise to me and why I underestimated Cody Garbrandt so heavily, is that Cody Garbrandt is the type of fighter I usually don't count on existing, which is the fighter who has a skill set that he or she does not use. Because typically that is an excuse for somebody who is fading or starting to fight stupid or not as good as everyone thinks they are. You know what I mean? Like, typically that's the thing we hear about your Adrian Broners, your pre-Diaz Conor McGregors. You hear it about Gennady Golovkin, who also revealed a bit against who's the French-Canadian guy that he fought? David Lemieux, that he still has some of a boxing game. He can still do it. But typically it doesn't happen. When somebody says, oh, they can do that, they just chose not to, it's usually an excuse, because why would most fighters do that? They're either actively forgetting things or they don't really have the skills we thought they did. Turns out Cody Garbrandt can box really, really well. And basically in 5 UFC fights leading up to that, he just didn't want to or have to. He could come after those opponents and knock them out very quickly. And against Henry Briones, he had an opponent who was pretty tentative and didn't want to engage, and so we didn't see a lot of what we saw against Cruz. Garbrandt's success seemed to be in convincing Dominick Cruz to be the one who came forward. And once he got Cruz doing that, I think there was more and more pressure on Cruz to come forward, because once he did, he started to feel himself losing the fight. And once he felt himself losing the fight, he felt he had to come forward to kind of teach Garbrandt a lesson, to put a stamp on a round and take some momentum back. And the more he tried, the more it became clear that coming after Cody Garbrandt, giving him the chance to slip and counter and pivot and sidestep and make you miss by just a little bit, is something he does really, really well.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. I think that there are a few things happening here that we need to take into account. I'm not sure that that Garbrandt hadn't used these things before so much as we hadn't seen this context for them, right? So sure, yeah. I think people going into fights with Cody Garbrandt before knew that he was going to try to come out, that they could get him to come after them, right? And so in that context, like, that worked for Garbrandt. He was happy to come not really pressure, but he would move forward, right? And so when you're moving forward the way that Garbrandt was, he wasn't showing off this kind of footwork, because he didn't have to. Like, he's so fast and so powerful, he could just slide right in, throw a couple of shots, hit you pretty hard. When you tried to throw back at him, he could exchange in the pocket. He didn't have to move his head.
He looked like a guy who was basically athletic enough, fast enough, explosive enough, and had good enough timing to just throw a 2-3-2 over and over until somebody got knocked out. And it didn't take long, so over and over really didn't mean much. But because it happened three 3-4 times in a 5-fight career in relatively quick succession, I think that totally sold me on the idea that that was all he had. You know?
Yeah, I don't know that I was sold on that being all he had, especially because he's still young and he's still getting better. It's also possible
sure,
that
yeah.
like these may have been tools that he had in his tool set, in his tool belt, but he hadn't worked on them for a couple of years. Like that's one of the really interesting things that we're seeing now in kind of a meta sense in MMA is guys who have a deep striking background going back to their teens. Like if you're Cody Garbrandt and you show up to Team Alpha Male and they say, okay, well, you already know how to box, you already have a pretty good idea how to wrestle. What you need to work on are scrambles and transitions and throwing kicks and things like that. Maybe he hadn't done like a lot of head movement drills and a lot of footwork drills for a couple of years. That's entirely possible.
Mm-hmm.
That like,
but they came back quickly when he started to focus on them again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that can be true of a lot of guys. Like Yanni and Jacek's kicks, right?
Sure,
like.
Yeah.
There was a period of like 2 years worth or 3 years where Joanna and Jacek didn't throw kicks. That just wasn't a thing that she did. And then all of a sudden, when she started throwing them again, you're like, oh yeah, she was a really good kickboxer.
That was like all she used to do was throw low kicks.
Yeah. So I think that there may be a little bit of that there. It may be that these are things that need to be sharpened. But as we have a generation of fighters coming up who have this kind of background, these kind of things may pop up sometimes, and we're like, holy shit, I did not know you knew how to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing too is how the thing that really surprised me was how poised Garbrandt does in mentally being able to do this for 5 rounds straight and fighting really consistently the crazy thing is Dominick Cruz ended up looking like the guy who felt pressure, who felt like there was some kind of urgency. Cody Garbrandt, I think, I've never seen somebody who was so obviously emotional before a fight come in and be so cold, and he still relished the opportunity to rub it in Cruz's face that he was losing. The emotion was still there, but he was impressively capable of quelling it, of keeping it under control and keeping himself cold for the fight.
Okay, so I have some caveats with that because I had felt fairly similarly until I went to a media lunch with him like the week before the fight or a week and a half before the fight, and at that point, I was really struck. And I know like the video made its way out afterwards and people were kind of making fun of some of Garbrandt's answers in there. And that's fair. Like you make fun of what Garbrandt had to say. But what struck me was his poise. That like this is a 25-year-old really doing media for maybe the second time. Like he had done a little bit before the Mitsugaki fight. But he was sharp. He was charismatic. He had good answers. He was under control. When he was talking about Cruz, he did not get emotional. Like, I think he was doing the trash talk because he felt like he needed to do the trash talk. I don't think he was like real invested in it, you know? Like, I think he, when he got up and ran after Cruz at the interview or whatever, I think he thought that would be a thing that would sell, that would help sell the fight. I think, yeah, he may have gotten a little pissed off, but like, Garbrandt does not strike me as a dude who was going to go out and fight dumb because Cruz was talking shit to him.
He definitely didn't, man. Cruz ended up kind of not fighting dumb, but Cruz is the one who I think was governed by his emotions a little bit in that fight. He was kind of governed by instinct more than game plan. Okay,
so I want to talk about this because I think we learned some deep things about Dominick Cruz's game, and I think we learned I think where we should be eating crow is in the idea of game planning for this fight.
Okay.
Not that I think that anybody else could have pulled off what Garbrandt did. Garbrandt had the tools and it had the tools in his skill set, and he had the physicality to make this work. Which I'm not saying like there's a blueprint now for beating Dominick Cruz, but what they did was, and we talked before the fight about, like, I think I said this, that I don't think that the guys at Team Alpha Male really understand, like, the conceptual basis of Dominick Cruz's movement. I don't think they understand in a really deep way why Cruz does the things that he does.
I saw the video of Danny Castillo. Did you see this video? Danny Castillo mimicking Dominick Cruz for Cody Garbrandt? Was bad.
I don't want to see it.
This is also, by the way, where it got brought up that we think we're smarter than coaches. I don't think I'm smarter than Danny Castillo. It was just, it didn't look like Dominick Cruz to me. That's all.
Well, okay, so this is my thing. It's like, and I think I said this before the fight, is that I didn't see how they could beat Dominick Cruz without really understanding why he does the things that he does. And I still don't think they understand why he does the things that he does, but they took themselves out of a situation where they needed to worry about it by just forcing Cruz to come to them over and over again.
Yeah.
So Cruz is dangerous, does his best work when you are coming after him. This is why Cruz and TJ Dillashaw are not the same fighter. Like, so Cruz needs you to come after him. He needs to get you moving through the space of the cage. He needs to get you working hard. He needs to get you thinking about why he's doing the things that he's doing. And then, only then, does it work when he does his blitzing attacks.
Yes.
When he cuts in and cuts his angles, moves around you, launches his combinations, and then exits on a different angle.
More similar than Stephen Thompson, I think, than anyone else in that regard, where you'll get these blitzing combinations, but it's really only after you've been lulled into his kind of fight.
Exactly, because when you come after Cruz, that is what allows him to set the distance, to set the rhythm, to set the timing, to set all of that stuff. And only once he is in control of those things, using his movement, does the rest of his game work, right? Like, and if you look at how and when he hits his takedowns, it's generally as you come forward, as you come at him, or after having set it up with some successful attacking combinations, that his wrestling game works. So what they did was take all of that away from him. They took away the straw that stirs the drink for Dominick Cruz by making Cruz come after Garbrandt. And it turns out that when you force Cruz to come forward, if you have really tight fundamental footwork, you can take away his angles. It's not that Cruz wasn't attacking on angles. It's that Garbrandt nullified them with his own footwork.
Yeah.
So that's why Cruz looked so shockingly hittable. It's not that Cruz wasn't doing the normal Dominick Cruz thing. It's that Garbrandt turned with him and addressed him.
And Cruz was even adapting. He was pretty on, actually, that night. And he said the same himself at the post-fight press conference. He really went out of his way to not accept any excuses. He said, I did my best. I came in perfect condition. Some people have said some things about him looking like he may have slowed down a bit with age. And maybe there's a possibility there that was part of it.
I said that, and I still feel that way, but we can come back to it.
Right, but the thing is that Dominick Cruz, I thought he fought a pretty typical Dominick Cruz performance. I don't think it was like a sudden decline or it was Dominick Cruz being totally different. It was that he wasn't allowed to fight to his game plan. He still used all of his regular tactics and techniques and setups and things. It's just that he had somebody who was taking them out of their context in which they're most useful. And I think this is where I feel the most foolish and where I can definitely say the people at Team Alpha Male are smarter than me, because I thought this was the stupidest idea in the world when they talked about doing it with Uriah Faber. When Uriah Faber said, our plan was to counter Dominick Cruz, I thought that is the worst idea I've ever heard. It turns out that you get somebody who's just a little more youthful and maybe has a deeper skill set in terms of boxing defense in particular. And it actually is the best way to fight Dominick Cruz that we've ever seen, is to make him come after you and to really commit to counter. Because there was an aspect of that game plan that, had he not been so determined to teach Garbrandt a lesson, might have given Cruz a window of opportunity, because and ended up giving him an opportunity as the fight went on, because Garbrandt, he really didn't want to lead. He the first 2 rounds were quite close because Garbrandt did not want to lead. There's a bit of a gambit there where he thought, I have to be so committed to not leading that Cruz is the first one to decide to come forward and throw. And I can't do it for him, or it's going to the whole thing is going to be off. I can't let him get used to reacting to what I'm doing. So he had to kind of be patient and wait for Dominick Cruz to start charging after him. But when it started to happen, I mean, it didn't really pick up till rounds 3 and 4. It was pretty huge. And it took Dominick Cruz until round 5 to sort of adjust that approach to the point where he could not get countered and actually start winning a round again.
Yeah. So I'm with all of that.
Discipline is the point. It took some real discipline.
Yeah, and I think that was probably, in addition to everything else, and I did a kind of an extensive write-up on this fight, if anybody's interested in reading more about it. But like it was all of these things. He had to have he had the right plan, which was to make Cruz come to him, because they tried this with Faber, right? Like they tried to make Cruz come to them, and that was when Faber had the most success in their second fight. It was when he had the most success in their third fight too, but he just got so shit kicked otherwise that it was kind of easy to miss. But Cruz has always been hittable as he comes in. There is a brief moment in there where you can hit Cruz. It just turns out that nobody has had A, the hand speed, B, the power, C, the footwork, D, and D, kind of the overall discipline necessary to stick to that.
Yeah, to do it
Cruz
consistently
really for it.
For 25 minutes. And also, perhaps you could say E, the conditioning to do it for 25 minutes, because Cody Garbrandt, throwing full power with almost everything he did, was remarkably able to keep up with Cruz. And maybe it's also the fact that he never threw unless Cruz was coming at him. And so he left the pace up to Cruz, but he hit hard enough that Cruz couldn't exploit that to tire him out. Because Cruz is not going to go in there and say, I'm going to take 50 punches this round if it means I slow him down. He couldn't. You know,
So a few things kind of on that, like, if you look at this fight statistically, if you look at the fight metric numbers, it looks like a Dominick Cruz fight. It looks like a fight that Cruz won because he outlanded Garbrandt by about 20 strikes according to fight metric. You look at his percentages, he missed a little more than he usually does, but he was throwing about his normal volume. Like, this really looked like, aside from not hitting any takedowns, this really looked like a normal Cruz fight. The problem was when he got hit so much harder than he was hitting Garbrandt. And you mentioned too Cruz's adjustments. Cruz did everything he possibly could. He fought his heart out. I just don't think this is just the first time we've seen Cruz against somebody with all of these tools who could put them all together, who could hit him so much harder than Cruz could hit back, to where the Cruz's volume advantage was not going to be enough to make it look like he was winning those rounds.
And he also, by the way, it's very important to note, could not get his wrestling game going. And that has always been a huge linchpin of Cruz's success, is that he gets you so focused on what he's doing with his boxing, with his awkward kicking and his footwork and his feinting and everything, that he sets you up for these beautiful takedowns. And I think, to my recollection, he only hit one in the fight and didn't really complete it, statistically speaking, because Garbrandt got right back up. And then Garbrandt responded brilliantly by taking Cruz down with a takedown every bit as beautiful. I mean, when Cruz takes people down, it usually looks like he's taking down a grappling dummy. That's how Cody Garbrandt took him down. And I've never seen anybody take Dominick Cruz down like that. But I think it has to do with how much respect Cody Garbrandt's punches demanded of Dominick Cruz, that he had to respond more dramatically to those punches than he ever has before. And that made him more susceptible for, switch-ups of tactics from Garbrandt.
Yeah, so a few different things to note on that front. So we got so focused on Garbrandt's boxing background and his striking game that we forgot that he was a really, really good wrestler. He was an Ohio State champion wrestler. That is not a small accomplishment.
And we can knock Team Alpha Male, but conditioning and wrestling, there's no questioning how well they do on those two things.
Yeah, you're talking about being on the mats with a bunch of Division I All-Americans all the time.
Yeah.
And so Garbrandt would have wrestled in college had his grades been better, but he barely graduated from high school. So there was a picture that was making the rounds of Garbrandt as a freshman in high school with Logan Stieber, who is a 4-time national champion wrestler. They were both state champions that year. That's the kind of company that that's the kind of skills that Garbrandt has as a wrestler. If you can win a state championship in Ohio, you know what you're doing in that particular phase of the fight. And when you combine that with his physicality and the fact that he wasn't letting Cruz dictate timing and distance, Cruz's takedowns, it now seems like they were destined to not work. If you have all that you can put together. But one thing before we make ourselves eat too much crow here, Garbrandt showed a lot of things that he had not shown before. It's not like going into this fight, you could look at the tape and say, oh yeah, absolutely, Garbrandt is going to stuff every one of Cruz's takedowns. Yeah. You know why? Nobody had shot a takedown on Garbrandt in the UFC before that. We
really?
had no idea.
Yeah,
zero.
Actually, I remember someone bringing that up. They said an interesting statistic going to this fight is Garbrandt's 0 of 0 takedowns or whatever defended of double legs. I think he's probably defended a couple
zero. In the UFC, 0. Nobody has shot a takedown on him.
Didn't Henry Barrones try one?
I don't think so.
That seems crazy that nobody's tried a takedown on him.
And even if you go back to his pre-UFC career, he ended those fights so quickly that nobody really had a chance to continually try to wrestle.
What we should have said is we should have gone into this fight the same way we went into the Mickey Gall fight a little more, and not been as dismissive of Garbrandt, but also not have been entirely hopeful and say we don't really know as much about Garbrandt as we should to make a really easy prediction, because it's just all quick finishes with his opponents all kind of being shell shocked.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that. I noticed this as I was finishing up my write-up, my breakdown of the fight for Bleacher Report. I'm like, I only wrote 4 or 5 paragraphs about Garbrandt.
Right.
And that was not for lack of trying. It was I had watched all of his fights over and over and over again. It's just there wasn't that much to say because we hadn't seen him in extended periods of time doing all that much.
Yeah. And even a friend of the show and unheralded MMA genius Schwan Humes, our friend Black Jordan Breen on Twitter, even he predicted Garbrandt would win, which screw him for doing that because he's the only person I know of as like an analyst who predicted that Garbrandt would win. Even he, I think, was surprised by the fact that I think he expected Garbrandt to counter to the body a lot and all that. And really, Garbrandt just kind of flat out outboxed Dominick Cruz. I don't think anyone expected him to just kind of technically outclass Cruz by having exactly the only kind of fight, it seems, that Dominick Cruz can't win with his typical volume advantage.
Yeah, it was super impressive. But you could see how, had he not gotten any knockdowns, how that fight could have been like a real razor thin kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. You could make an argument for a Cruz draw. That's the best thing you could give Cruz because that 10-8 round 4. But it is possible to give Cruz rounds 1, 2, and 5. He definitely won 5. He could have won either one or two. But really, because of the knockdown, and and again, that's the story of each round is also the story of the fight. Cody Garbrandt's power combined with his skill was the difference maker. Mm-hmm. That Cruz he outscored him in every round, but never hit Garbrandt hard enough to match the damage Garbrandt was doing. And as for the fight as a whole, Garbrandt had the one round that really, really mattered. And so that gave him the decision.
There are apparently, it has been brought to my attention, some truthers out there who think that Dominick Cruz got robbed and that he actually won 3 rounds of that fight and deserved the win.
It's possible, but even if he did, he would get a draw.
I think that's fucking nutty, man. I'm not gonna I don't even want to entertain this. Like and I'll tell you why, because it comes back to we've talked about scoring before. You and I are both people who put emphasis on volume and throwing shots. Like our least favorite kind of fighter is the low output, super dynamic guy.
Yeah.
Like that's and. I don't want to overstate the case, but the reason why we like fighters who throw strikes is because throwing lots of strikes tends to correlate to winning rounds.
Yeah.
Not because there is some inherent value in just like spamming volume. Like that's not the point. The point is that throwing strikes tends to win you rounds, not that you should throw lots of strikes just because. If one guy is fucking flattening the other with shots, even if he's getting outlanded by some margin, it doesn't matter, man. Like this
was like a much simpler version of Lawler Condit, basically.
Yeah. Because in that fight, the volume gap was so huge that it was hard not to feel that. The volume gap in this fight was not as big, and one guy was obviously landing the shots that counted.
And both guys were very clearly hurting each other. Like everything was closer with a similar dynamic. This one is that dynamic, but just not as close. Garbrandt had the only really clear round of the fight. In fact, I'd say he had the only 2 really clear rounds. You could say Dominick Cruz is round 5, but rounds 3 and 4 are unquestionably Garbrandt's. And you kind of literally the best score I could give Dominick Cruz is a draw. And that was if I was very forgiving in rounds 1 and 2 because you have to give Garbrandt a 10-8.
Yeah, and I think that like the judges saw it a little more clearly maybe than I think people watching at home did, because Rogan's commentary real quick. Rogan gets challenger bias real bad.
Yeah. We all do to an extent, but Rogan doesn't have as much time to think as we do because he has to keep talking.
Yeah, and because partially the way that he calls fights is based on picking up a narrative, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with giving viewers a narrative to hang on to. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it works.
And I like Rogan. I like Rogan's comment. I generally like his commentary. I think people are too hard on him a lot of the time.
Yeah, same.
I think that, but his commentary definitely influenced people to see this fight as being not as close as it was in the early going.
But I do think it was still. I think Cody Garbrandt win is like 90% of people should have come up with a pretty easy Garbrandt win.
Yeah, I mean, hold on real quick. I'm going to check MMA decisions and look at the media scores.
We'll find out
and just see what people came up with. Okay, so we had there were 4 49-45s. 149-46, a whole bunch of 48-46s, and then a bunch of 48-47s. Nobody scored the fight for Cruz.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing is it was still competitive. It was like my classic example is always Cormier Barnett, a fight that the scorecards will never reflect how close it was because everyone agrees Cormier won that fight. But you can also watch each round and be like, yeah, Barnett's pretty competitive in a lot of these rounds. He just didn't win them, or like Jones Cormier is a similar fight with Jones winning most of the rounds pretty clearly, but that a 49-46 Jones doesn't tell you how competitive some of the portions of the fight were. This is a lot like that to me.
Yeah, I'm with that. So should we move on to the third segment and
we
talk
gotta
a little
take
bit
a break.
about the likely next challenger
Yeah,
for Cody Garbrandt?
And we're going to go over a little bit, but that's okay. We'll try to wrap up this next segment pretty quickly. But when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about Dillashaw's masterclass, one of my favorite performances of the night, and the potential of a Dillashaw-Garbrandt title fight after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Let's very quickly get through, Pat, what TJ Dillashaw did to John Lineker. We were both a little more nervous about this than it turned out we maybe should have been. TJ Dillashaw really took it to John Lineker. John Lineker only made it a good fight, but with about 25 seconds in the last round. Otherwise, it's hard to talk about this as anything other than just a good performance from the former bantamweight champ.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what was shocking to me was I suppose this shouldn't have been shocking, because if we take as our basic point that TJ Dillashaw is really fucking good, and is at worst the second best fighter in this division, third best fighter in this division, then this shouldn't have been shocking. So real quick before we talk about Dillashaw, like, bantamweight seems to me to be one of those divisions where there's a clear-cut top three right now, and everybody else is just trailing way behind.
There's some people coming up. What, Jimmy Rivera's in there in the mix? Might be.
I think any one of those three guys at the top kind of can embarrass Rivera.
Well, we will see, Pat. I'm a Rivera mark, see. But we'll see.
We'll see. But okay, so at least right now, maybe Rivera can break into that. But I think these three guys are just head and shoulders above everybody else, because Lineker is really good. And so that needs to be our starting point. Lineker is a really good fighter, and Dillashaw kind of embarrassed him. Yeah. He did it in a few ways. He set a really long distance. He used his kicking games. He refused to engage Lineker in the pocket where Lineker wanted to be. He feinted a very great deal, and when Lineker overcommitted, then Dillashaw took him down. It was beautiful. It wasn't like super complicated, but it took a ton of discipline. It took a ton of training time. It took fantastic timing. And it took Dillashaw resisting the urge to bite down and throw the way that he really likes to.
That's our friend and friend of the show, Phil McKenzie, brought that up on Twitter during the event, and I found it to be a pretty fascinating way of viewing this fight. It was kind of like Dillashaw. He had the game plan to be the old version of himself, like pre-Ludwig Dillashaw. He kind of had another style in his back pocket, and used it in this fight, where he wasn't going in there and constantly touching Lineker with his jab and using all these tight angles and throwing combinations and pressuring Lineker in that way. He wasn't being really an aggressive counterpuncher. It was a lot of wrestling, top control, and kicking from long distance. And that was really what won the fight for him. And I think that more than anything else gave me confidence in TJ Dillashaw getting another title run, or beating, say, Dominick Cruz in a rematch, or potentially beating Garbrandt, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Is that his problem against Cruz the first time was really that he ended up fighting pretty intelligently and kicking Cruz's legs a lot, but he kind of got away from it in the beginning of the fight. He kind of lost his game plan and seemed to he had to adapt and find the strategy that would win him the fight, and didn't do it soon enough to win it convincingly, at least for two of the judges. But this time around, he stuck to a game plan that is, as you said, very different from the style that he has now learned to use in most fights. It was not the TJ Dillashaw who fought Renan Barão, or even the Dillashaw who fought Rafael Assunção. It was a very different approach, and he did it very coolly and calmly for three rounds straight, with really no changes.
It was exceptionally impressive.
Yeah.
Like that was some of the stuff that I like. It just blew me away that not that he was able to come up with the game plan, but that he was able to execute it
Yeah.
perfectly in the face of having John Lineker throwing bungalows at him. You
Right,
know,
just like Garbrandt, an impressive display of discipline and discipline and composure.
yeah, everybody has a plan until John
Right.
Lineker starts landing body shots. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. And
like
he by the way, I think he scared Lineker a little bit. Like, I don't, fear is maybe not the best way to, but in the way that we generally understand people to have fear put into them in a fight where they kind of worry about something, I didn't think it was possible. TJ Dillashaw did it. There was a moment in round 3 where he feinted a punch and then feinted a takedown right after. He had John Lineker biting harder on a feint than I've ever seen, harder than I see most fighters biting on feints, and it's John Lineker. And he was really, really worried about getting hit with another takedown when the third round of that fight rolled around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that in itself is impressive.
Yeah.
So all credit to him. I think we kind of saw, unfortunately, John fucking Lineker's limitations.
My dream as the anti-Lineker fan is just now that now that I've finally been seeing that somebody outclass him, is to see him be Cruz's comeback fight. Make it Cruz Lineker so I can see somebody else outclass him.
Yeah,
So
would watch.
I can
Would
enjoy
watch.
my Schadenfreude a second time around.
Yeah, well, so with Lineker, like this to me was the first fight where the size was really a huge disadvantage because he would try and find windows to throw, and he would come up short. Like that happened especially in the transitions. Part of what makes Lineker really good is that if you shoot a takedown on him as he's getting back to his feet, he looks for a little window there to land a shot or two. Dillashaw was just an inch or two out of range every time.
Yeah.
Like it was this tiny little margin, and it's like, oh, if you were an inch or two taller, like if you were 5'5", maybe that punch lands and knocks Dillashaw's head clean off.
Yeah, I was actually kind of struck by how small Dillashaw looked, actually. A lot of people said after the fight that Lineker looked really small. I kind of expected Dillashaw to dwarf him a little more. And it kind of made me realize that Dillashaw is actually not a huge bantamweight.
Dillashaw could easily cut to 125 if he wanted.
He's not actually that big. He was definitely, I mean, he was taller than Lineker, who's very stocky, but I also think it was a matter of skill and awareness that he was just not there to be hit. He got up in the right way. He didn't rush. And so,
absolutely. No question about that. But still, that's the kind of thing where if you're a little taller, you have more of a margin for error.
If Lineker were the same size, he would have been able to mitigate Dillashaw's skill a little more effectively.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but okay. So real quick before we finish up, how do you see a fight between TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt playing out? Because it looks like at this point that's what we're going to get next.
Which I'm happy. I think that's a great fight. I mean, Garbrandt has made me so much more excited about him than I ever was before, realizing how much more he has to give as a fighter. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of TJ Dillashaw. I'm probably the only person on all of MMA Twitter who was actually rooting for Dillashaw while he was taking down John Lineker, because a lot of people were upset. They wanted to see Lineker do his usual thing, and Dillashaw just wouldn't let him. But it's a fascinating fight. My gut says that TJ Dillashaw wins it, but I'm a little nervous now about making any claims about Garbrandt's limitations, having been as surprised as I was in that fight. I mean, TJ Dillashaw had a really close fight with Dominick Cruz, and this is a bit of MMA math, but Dillashaw didn't 100% convincingly beat Cruz, and Garbrandt pretty much did. And so, yeah, it totally changes the division from there are the two really good guys to now there's a trinity of top fighters, and how will the pecking order there be resolved? I'm not 100% sure. My gut says Dillashaw, but I really have to think about the dynamics of the matchup, and we can talk about it a little bit here, but what does your gut feeling say?
I think that Dillashaw is a worse matchup for Garbrandt than Cruz was now in hindsight, because I don't think the game plan that that Dillashaw or that Garbrandt employed to beat Cruz is going to work as well against Dillashaw. It will be there in pieces for him, but I think the volume difference would be much more noticeable. Yeah. Like I think it would be a much more dangerous gambit. Like I think that Garbrandt would have to knock Dillashaw out, whereas he could kind of win a close but clear decision against Cruz, because this was something that I noted before Dillashaw and Cruz fought, and it turned out this way when they actually matched up too. Dillashaw throws more than Cruz does. when he gets in that, okay, we're gonna do the damn thing mode, and he comes after you with 5-7 strikes in sequence. He does that much better than Dominick Cruz does. He is a much better moving forward fighter. His footwork is better when he's moving forward. He cuts better angles when he's moving forward. Unfortunately for him, when he fought Cruz's defensive footwork and defensive movement is much better, right?
Yeah.
So like that's kind of the duality of Dominick Cruz that we saw play out in that fight versus the Garbrandt fight. Cruz is much better moving back than he is moving forward. Dillashaw is much better moving forward than he is moving back, despite the kind of superficial similarities in their footwork and their movement patterns. Like they're not trying to do the same thing at all. Cruz is trying to get you to chase. Dillashaw is trying to come after you. Like
yeah.
The fact that there are similar tools employed to do those two things in terms of stance switches, angle cutting, pivots, turns, all of that stuff is kind of coincidental rather than connected. So that makes this a much more Dillashaw Garbrandt a much tougher matchup for Garbrandt, I think, because because Dillashaw is so much better. If Garbrandt wants to hang back and counter, I think he's either going to knock Dillashaw out or he's going to get outworked. Like where those rounds that were close still ended up going to Garbrandt because he had landed by far the harder shots. If he gets outlanded 2-1 but is landing the harder shots, or 3-1 but is landing the harder shots, that's difficult to say who that round goes to. That's a much closer gambit.
And then of course Dillashaw does hit harder than Cruz as well. So he's landing the harder shots. The gulf there between the power is much less. Mm-hmm. So if you even put up the same numbers Cruz did, but you have about 30% more power than Dominick Cruz, which Dillashaw does at least, then those rounds become much closer.
Also a much more dangerous transitional fighter in terms of if he does get you down. I don't think he's as good a pure wrestler as Cruz is.
Yeah.
But I think he's better at wrestling moving forward. Yeah. First of all,
and also he was very flowy with his top control combined with his ground and pound against Lineker. Very, very adept at sliding into positions of like mostly control and popping Lineker while he did the correct things and escaped those positions, but he always got 3 or 4 shots in when Lineker was getting back to half guard or trying to re-guard or giving up his back or attacking a leg or whatever. Dillashaw really impressed me in how well he was ready to transition while attacking Lineker's reactions.
Yeah, gut reaction, I think I probably picked Dillashaw in that fight, but part of the problem too is like Dillashaw is going to give Garbrandt more opportunities, I think, to land the big counter shot than Cruz did.
So
like,
I was going to address that actually. Cruz, I did the math here, by the way. Cruz attempts 11.39 significant strikes per minute, 11.39. Dillashaw attempts 13.12 per minute. Significant strikes, that is. And they both land. Dillashaw both lands more and lands at a higher percentage. So he is more accurate, more powerful, and throws at a higher clip. So that is an essential advantage for Dillashaw in this kind of matchup, is that he lands more of what he throws more, and lands harder when he does connect. So that's obviously an advantage. I wonder, though, if Dillashaw is obviously, we think of him as being more hittable than Cruz. But is it just because he comes after his opponent? And would he really be more hittable than Cruz was on Friday? Because Cruz was more hittable than ever just because he had to come forward. And that's what we've usually assessed as the main reason that Dillashaw absorbs more strikes, is that he just spends more time in range. And is a typical Dillashaw any different from a Cruz who decides that he has to come forward?
That is a really good point.
Right? Maybe he'll be exactly as hittable as Cruz. And if that's the case, that might still be a recipe for beating Garbrandt.
Okay. So flip side to that though, does Dillashaw have Cruz's chin and toughness?
Can he literally be knocked unconscious for about half a second and then come up and start attacking a takedown the way Cruz did? Could Dillashaw survive that round 4? I'm not sure there are many fighters who can.
That's one thing that we absolutely know for sure about Dominick Cruz, is that he is rawhide tough.
And we know it surer than ever now, because Garbrandt was easily the hardest hitter he's ever faced. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone recover that quickly or that completely after the kind of shots Cruz took in round 4.
Yeah, I mean, Garbrandt put out a bunch of dudes. He put out Tomas Almeida, who had never been knocked out before. He put out Takeya Mitsugaki, who hadn't been knocked out like that ever.
Yeah.
And he put out Augusto Mendez, who is a young fighter, fresh with an untouched chin.
Yeah.
Like, that's just this year. I mean, I kind of think that, like, Yeah, I don't know, man. I know it's a fight that I want to see. I can see good arguments for both guys. To me, it's a coin flip at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think I guess I very, very, very slightly lean Dillashaw, but with a strong idea in my head that Garbrandt could knock him out.
It's basically for me like a similar. If I'm imagining a similar fight that that Garbrandt had with Cruz, with Dillashaw just naturally being more willing to come forward and mix it up, and then giving Dillashaw more forgiveness than Cruz enjoyed because of the higher work rate and the better power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being more of a finisher. Maybe that's the cushion that a guy like if Cruz was a finisher who could really hurt people, that fight may have been very different. So
Yeah.
it was amazing, man. I don't think I've been as excited watching. I've never been so excited to be wrong because I was wrong, and then it allowed me to experience Garbrandt as if I'd never seen him fight before. I was totally shocked.
Were looking at in a real sense. We were looking at him. We were looking at a totally different fighter.
We'd never seen that before, and it was really stunning, especially against a fighter as high quality as Dominick Cruz is the greatest bantamweight of all time, and Cody Garbrandt went in there, and we got to see him totally surprise us and totally surprise Dominick Cruz. And as a relatively untested young fighter, very young, beat the guy who I think is the consensus best the division has ever seen. So that was pretty amazing. Unfortunately, we were going to do a heavy bag question, but we're already about 13 minutes over our hour mark. So we're going to have to save it for next week. And this is a good time to put out the call for more questions. I think next week we're going to be revisiting our Styles Make Fight series, looking at those like bulk predictions we made last time we did that, and then evaluating them, assessing how those style matchups played out and why, and then probably making some more picks. But that will also give us room to answer questions. So in addition to the one we were going to answer today, I'd like to ask all the other people who are $5 patrons on Patreon to submit your questions to us, and we'll try to get to a few of them at the end of next week's show. And then just a reminder that a $3 pledge on Patreon gets you access to 2 bonus episodes every single month. And this week, we are going to be putting out our year-end awards, the heavies. We are going to basically name our favorite.
No, not the heavies, the handies.
The handies. I'm sorry, the handies. We're gonna name our picks for best striker, best fighter, best performance, best fight, so on and so forth. We may think of a few new surprising categories for you as well. But $3 a month. I believe you can pledge now and still get access to that. And if not, get in touch with me and maybe I can try to. If you really want to subscribe just to hear that episode or something, and you don't want to wait until next month for your pledge to go through, then I may be able to send you the file or something in good faith. So we'll try to work something out, but keep your eyes out for that tonight if you're already pledged to the $3 price. And that is about it for today's show, and enough ad copy probably for the rest of the month. enough self-promotion. Although, having said that, Pat, what do you got coming out this week?
So I did a technical recap of UFC 207 that's up on Bleacher Report right now. Let's see, what else did I do? Oh man, I'm doing a piece on Ronda Rousey and what she would need to do to get herself back to being a top fighter. Kind of some of the stuff that we talked about here today. Man, and then I don't know. I don't think I think we're doing the kind of the year-end pieces for Bleacher Report that should be out. I'm contributing to one on bold predictions for 2017, and I wrote up the fight of the year for Bleacher Report. And then I think a new Fall of Rome episode. Before the next time we do this show, I'm looking at releasing the first episode of another podcast that I'm doing with a historian friend of mine, so that should be out soon too. I'm trying to think, what else am I doing, man? I don't know. There could be more, but that's all for now.
Classic Wyman. What else am I doing? I know there's something. As for me, the Amanda Nunes article that I talked about earlier, comparing her to Jose Aldo, I'm going to try to kind of parallel their stories, both like coming from rough backgrounds and finding their way in the UFC. And then I'm going to try to do something on Garbrandt Cruz. It may actually fall in as part of a series of year-end articles I'm trying to do, which every year I always think I'm going to do like 5 year-end articles, and I never do, but I'm going to do my best, and maybe if I do an upset of the year, that'll be it. It's hard to think of actually a more surprising one this year. We had home Rousey last year, but maybe Woodley Lawler, but there's so much to talk about with Garbrandt Cruz as an upset, and for me personally, I don't think I've been as surprised by a result since Rousey home. So Probably that and the Nunes Aldo article, and then more things. We're going to both try and do, I'm sure, a lot of stuff recapping the year because it has been a banner year for MMA. A shitty year for boxing, unfortunately, for my fellow boxing fans out there, but it's been a great year for MMA to the point where I was shocked. Were you shocked when Do Ha Choi Cub Swanson happened? Everyone, of course, were excited. We're like, oh, fight of the year contender. That might be it. And then people have to remind you that Lawler Condit, both McGregor Diaz fights, Dillashaw Cruz, so many good fights happened this year. So it's been a good one, and we have been very, very grateful and happy to have all of you with us. We've been picking up tons of new listeners in the past few months, tons of people pledging on Patreon to get those bonus episodes, and we're just happy to see that there's such a good response from everyone who is obviously, there's a big audience out there that's really eager to hear things about the nitty-gritty, the technical points of fighting, the finer points of face punching, you might say. And if you came here today, and if you came here throughout 2016 for the finer points of face punching, I'm very happy to say you came to the right place. Thank you everyone for listening. This has been Heavy Hands.